The year was 1520, and the Valley of Mexico trembled with anticipation. The midday sun burned white and merciless above the land, turning the stone temples into blazing towers of light and shadow. From the causeways that stretched across the great lake, the Aztec warriors came in waves, a living tide of feathers, paint, and steel-hard muscle. They marched with obsidian blades sharp enough to carve bone like water, their spears gleaming with tips black as night. Each warrior bore the marks of gods on his skin, painted in reds, yellows, and deep blues that shimmered under the sun. Their steps shook the dust from the earth. Their drums beat so loudly that even the vultures circling high above tilted their wings in unease. The drums were not music. They were prophecy. Each thunderous strike told of sacrifice, of blood to be spilled for Huitzilopochtli, the sun god who demanded nothing less than victory. And there, across the field, stood the strangers, the Spaniards, a few hundred men wrapped in steel, their bodies hidden beneath plates of armor that glared like mirrors in the sunlight. Some sat astride beasts the Aztecs had never known before, towering animals with eyes like fire and hooves that cracked the ground. At their sides rested weapons unlike any seen in this land, crossbows that snapped death across distance, and long, heavy tubes that spat thunder and smoke. The air between the two armies quivered, as though the gods themselves held their breath. Behind the Aztecs rose the towering pyramids, their steps soaked in the memory of countless sacrifices. Those temples had seen centuries of empires rise and fall, but never had they faced a trial like this. For when obsidian clashed against steel, and gods met gunpowder, the very fate of a world would hang in the balance. The drums stopped. For a heartbeat, silence ruled the battlefield. Thousands of Aztec warriors stood frozen, their obsidian blades lifted, their feathers trembling in the wind. On the far side, the Spaniards lowered their lances and raised their strange, thunder-spitting weapons. Then the silence shattered. With a cry that echoed like jaguars in the night, the Aztec front ranks surged forward. They charged as one vast body, their sandals pounding the earth, their war cries rising higher than the shrieking birds that scattered from the trees. Spears gleamed like a storm of black lightning. The Spaniards answered. A sudden crack of thunder split the air, followed by a cloud of smoke that rolled across the field. Fire leapt from the strange iron tubes in their hands, and men in the first Aztec rows fell screaming, their chests torn open by invisible death. Yet the warriors did not stop. Not for blood, not for death. For every man that fell, 3 more leapt over him, pressing forward. Then came the horses. The armored beasts surged ahead with a power that seemed more divine than mortal. Their hooves pounded like war drums, their riders lowering lances that glinted in the sun. To the Aztecs, it was as though the Spaniards had merged with God's beasts, man and creature one. Warriors screamed in terror as the horses trampled them, bones breaking beneath the iron-shod hooves. But the Aztecs struck back. A spear found its mark, plunging deep into the belly of a horse. The beast screamed, rearing in agony, throwing its rider to the dirt. In a heartbeat, 6 warriors swarmed the fallen Spaniard, dragging him into the dust. Obsidian blades flashed. The ground drank his blood. The earth trembled with the clash. Steel against stone, thunder against flesh, courage against terror. Above it all, the sun burned mercilessly, as if the gods themselves demanded every drop of blood this day could give. The two armies slammed together like storms colliding. Gone was the order of marching lines. The battlefield became a twisting sea of men, weapons, and screams. An Aztec warrior in bright green feathers leapt at a Spaniard, his obsidian club raised high. The steel helmet turned, and the Spaniard's sword cut down with brutal weight. Stone shattered, sparks flew, and the Aztec staggered. But before the Spaniard could strike again, another warrior lunged in from the side, his blade slicing into the gap beneath the Spaniard's arm. The man cried out, falling back into the press of bodies. Gunfire cracked again. The smoke hung heavy now, choking, blinding. Each shot ripped open another warrior, but the reload was slow, and the Aztecs knew no fear. They poured in before the thunder weapons could speak again, dragging men down beneath a frenzy of obsidian teeth. The Spaniards fought like cornered wolves. Their steel armor turned many blows, their swords cut with the sharpness of death, but they were few, so few, and around them surged thousands. One Spaniard thrust his blade through the chest of a painted warrior, only to find himself yanked backward by a rawhide rope. He hit the ground, and in an instant, hands seized his limbs, pulling him toward the rear. He kicked, cursed, bit, but the Aztecs were not killing him. Not yet. His screams vanished beneath the roar of the battlefield as they dragged him toward the pyramids. Blood splashed the dust. Men slipped on it as they fought. Horses screamed and toppled. The air was filled with obsidian clashing against steel, a sound like grinding stone mixed with the ring of iron. It was no longer simply a battle. It was chaos. It was a world ending and another clawing to be born. And the gods, whichever gods ruled this day, were drinking deeply. Through the haze of smoke and dust, a different kind of struggle played out. Not every Aztec strike was meant to kill. Many blows were aimed to stun, to cripple, to trap. For theirs was not only a war for land, but a war for the gods, and the gods demanded captives. Cries of agony rose as Spaniards were dragged screaming from the melee. Some had their swords torn from their hands, others were tangled in rawhide lassos that tightened around their necks and arms. They kicked, bit, cursed, but to no avail. Warriors pulled them backward, through the thrashing mass of bodies, toward the looming pyramids that rose behind the Aztec ranks. There, high above, priests stood waiting, their robes stained dark with old blood. They raised their arms to the sun as if they could already smell the hearts that would be offered before the day's end. One Spanish soldier, his helmet torn away, his face streaked with dust and blood, was seized by two jaguar warriors. Their helmets snarled with carved wooden fangs, their painted skins alive with fury. He screamed as they carried him, his feet dragging through the dirt, but no one came to his aid. Around him, the world was collapsing in thunder and death. Meanwhile, the Spaniards, still on their feet, pulled tighter together. They formed a bristling circle of steel and shields, their horses stamping nervously at the edge. The ground around them was a carpet of the fallen, Aztec and Spaniard alike. From the heart of the circle, the thunder guns spoke again, each blast carving holes in the Aztec tide. Yet the warriors did not falter. Every death was an offering. Every prisoner seized was a gift to their gods. And above it all, the pyramids watched, as they had for centuries, their stone faces cold and patient, waiting for the rivers of blood that would soon climb their steps. In the heart of the Spanish circle stood Hernán Cortés. His armor was dented, his face streaked with dust and blood, but his eyes burned with the fire of command. Around him, men wavered, shaken by the endless tide that pressed in from all sides. Cortés lifted his sword high, its steel glinting even through the haze of smoke. "Ánimo, hombres," he roared. "Stand firm. The Lord has not brought us across the ocean to die on these stones. Hold your ground, and the heathen will break." The men clung to his words as to a lifeline. They tightened their ranks, shields overlapping, pikes thrusting outward. The thunder of their guns cracked again, shattering the chest of a warrior who had leapt forward with a shriek. The man fell twitching at Cortés' feet. A horse screamed nearby as an obsidian spear slashed deep into its flank. The beast toppled, crushing its rider beneath its weight. Cortés lunged, hacking down the Aztec who rushed in to finish the Spaniard. His blade bit into painted flesh, spraying blood across the dust. Still, the press was terrible. For every warrior cut down, two more seemed to rise. The air was alive with war cries. The jaguars growl, the eagles scream, the high-pitched shrieks of those who fought in honor of the sun. One of Cortés' captains, a grizzled man named Sandoval, staggered to his side. His face was pale beneath the grime. "They'll drown us in their numbers, Hernán," he growled. "We must break through or we are finished." Cortés' gaze swept the battlefield. The towering pyramids, the endless wave of feathered warriors, the priests already lifting their arms toward the sky in expectation of sacrifice. His jaw tightened. "No," he said, voice like iron. "We will not run. God tests us here, and God will deliver us. Aim for their leaders." Break their spirit, and the rest will falter. And with that, he spurred the remaining cavalry forward, straight into the densest heart of the Aztec tide. Cortés' cavalry surged forward like a bolt of iron lightning. Horses reared and screamed, hoofs smashing into the dirt, spears thrusting forward, blades swinging in deadly arcs. The Aztecs met them with everything they had: jaguar warriors, eagle warriors, and seasoned spearmen. The first clash was thunder itself incarnate. A Spanish horse plunged into the mass, its rider slashing wildly, but an obsidian spear found its mark. The horse screamed, stumbling, flinging its rider into a heap of dust and feathers. Around him, the Aztec tide pressed like a living wall. Cortés spurred his mount, cutting a swath, his eyes scanning for the leaders of this army, the ones who directed the fury. On the other side, a young Aztec warrior named Itzcuintli fought like a man possessed. His heart pounded in rhythm with the drums that still beat somewhere in the rear. He had trained his whole life for this moment, for honor, for the gods, for his people. When a Spaniard charged him, sword raised, he sidestepped, jabbing his obsidian blade into the man's side. The Spaniard fell, screaming, but Itzcuintli barely had time to breathe before another came at him. The battlefield had become a blur. Smoke and dust filled the air, blood slicked the ground, and the cries of the dying were everywhere. Horses toppled, warriors fell, and priests shouted directions from the steps of the distant pyramids. Every clash felt as though it could shake the very foundations of the earth. Cortés' cavalry carved a temporary path, but it was narrow, surrounded by a sea of feathers and steel. He knew their numbers were overwhelming. Still, he pressed forward, aiming for the priests atop the pyramids. He believed, or perhaps hoped, that if the heart of the enemy was struck down, the rest would falter. Itzcuintli's eyes caught movement: the strange thunder weapons, the towering horses, the glinting steel helmets of the men who seemed unstoppable. Fear flickered, but it was tempered by the fire in his blood. The gods had fought with their ancestors. They would fight with him. And as the sun burned mercilessly overhead, the two forces collided again, each believing the other could not be stopped, yet neither willing to yield. High atop the pyramids, the priests moved with deliberate grace, as if the chaos below were part of a ritual only they could see. Smoke curled from braziers, filling the air with the scent of burning copal. Blood from earlier offerings streaked the stone steps, dark against the sun-bleached stone. A young priest held a captive by the arms, his chest heaving with the rhythm of terror. The man was a Spaniard, his armor dented and scorched, his face pale beneath the dirt and blood. The priest raised a ceremonial obsidian knife, the edge catching the sunlight, making it seem as if it glowed. Below, the battle raged, but the priests barely flinched. Every scream, every clash of steel, every cry of the wounded was fuel for the gods. This was the reason for the fight. Not land, not men, but the hearts that would beat once more in the sacred fires above. Itzcuintli, his armor torn and smeared with blood, noticed the movements on the pyramid steps. He hesitated only for a moment, heart hammering. If the priests were allowed to finish, the gods would claim more than just a few men. They would take the soul of their army's spirit, and with it, the courage of the warriors below. Cortés, meanwhile, was scanning the distant pyramids through the smoke and dust, realizing that brute force alone would not win this day. To strike at the enemy, he would have to climb, to reach the very heart of this ancient power. And yet, the thought of facing the priests, of standing beneath the sun god's altar, made even the bravest shiver. The battlefield was a living, breathing thing, a storm of fire, blood, and steel. But above it all, the pyramids stood, eternal and unyielding, and the priests prepared to offer sacrifice, their chants weaving through the din of war. Cortés spurred his horse toward the pyramid's base, his remaining men close behind. Each step of the great stone stairs seemed impossibly high, and the heat radiating from the sun-baked stones made their armor unbearable. Sweat poured from their faces, mixing with dust and blood. Yet they climbed, driven by desperation and the hope of breaking the heart of the Aztec army. Below, the battle still raged. Warriors surged, fell, and rose again, each side feeding the other's fury. But Cortez's eyes were fixed above, on the priests, on the captives, on the altar where the gods demanded tribute. It squintly, seeing the Spaniards attempt this daring assault, barked orders to the closest warriors. Protect the captives. No man may reach the god's steps. His voice cut through the din like an obsidian blade, steady and commanding. Young warriors leapt into the fray, forming a shield around the prisoners, their spears and clubs thrust outward. One of Cortez's men fell, thrown from his horse by a jaguar warrior, but the commander pressed forward. Each step brought him closer to the priests, closer to the altar that seemed alive with menace. The screams of captives mixed with the war cries below, creating a terrifying symphony that threatened to split the sky itself. As Cortez reached the final platform, he saw them. The priests, faces painted with sacred dyes, hands raised, chanting. The Spaniards dismounted, swords ready, hearts hammering. The wind carried the scent of incense and blood, and the sun blazed directly overhead, making every shadow dance like a specter. It was not just a battle for men, for land, or for victory. It was a battle for the soul of a world, and the steps beneath their feet seemed to tremble in recognition of what was about to unfold. At the top of the pyramid, Cortez came face to face with the high priest. His robe was crimson and gold, the headdress towering like the sun itself. In his hands, the obsidian knife glinted, a promise of death, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. "You dare climb to the steps of Huitzilopochtli?" The priest's voice thundered, echoing across the battlefield below. "You are not men. You are insects crawling where gods tread." Cortez raised his sword, its edge gleaming in the sun. "I do not come to defile your gods, but to protect my men. Step aside, or face your end." The priest laughed, a sound that cut through the chaos like ice. "End? You know not what you face. Every life you take feeds the fire of the gods. Every strike you land will be returned tenfold. The sun sees all, and it will not favor you." They circled one another, the wind whipping around the top of the pyramid. Below, the Aztec warriors continued to fight with desperate fury, but all eyes were drawn upward, to this impossible duel that would determine the fate of the captives and the course of the battle. Cortez lunged, blade striking with precision. The priest deflected with the flat of his knife, sparks flying. They exchanged blows, steel against obsidian, human strength against divine will. The chants of the priests around them rose, a low, throbbing rhythm that seemed to make the air itself shiver. And far below, it squintly watched, torn between leading his warriors and seeing the fate of the captives unfold above. Every second felt stretched across eternity, and he realized that the outcome atop the pyramid would ripple through the battlefield like an earthquake, deciding not only who lived and died, but whose gods would command the day. The duel atop the pyramid grew more frenzied. Cortez pressed forward, sweat and blood streaking his face, muscles screaming under the weight of his armor. The high priest met each strike with uncanny precision, obsidian flashing, deflecting steel with movements that seemed almost beyond human. Below, the battlefield roared. Aztec warriors surged, Spaniards fell back, and the smoke from thunder guns mingled with the scent of sweat and blood. But at the top, time itself seemed to slow. Every clash of metal sent sparks flying into the blinding sun, as if the gods themselves were testing the courage of men. Cortez gritted his teeth, feinting to the left and then striking right, driving the priest back toward the altar. The priest snarled, but faltered for the first time, his foot slipping on the sacred stones. Cortez seized the moment, swinging with everything he had. The blade grazed the priest's robe, cutting deep into flesh beneath the ceremonial layers. The priest cried out, not just a scream of pain, but of fury, disbelief, and anger at the audacity of mortals. He swung wildly, desperate, but Cortez ducked, countering with a swift thrust. Obsidian met steel, then gave way. The priest staggered, clutching the wound, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Far below, it squintly and the Aztec warriors froze, sensing the shift above. The drums had not stopped, but their rhythm seemed to waver, a pause in the storm. The captives clutched one another, trembling, knowing that the fate of their lives now hung on a knife's edge. Cortez's chest heaved. The fight was not over, but for the first time, he saw a path. A chance to strike a blow that could shatter the enemy's spirit, topple their gods, and change the course of the battle. Below the pyramid, the Aztec warriors sensed the change. The high priest, the anchor of their faith and the conductor of their fury, faltered atop the sacred steps. Shouts of command wavered, and for the first time, doubt seeped into the hearts of warriors who had fought like demons. Esquintly's eyes widened. He could see the priest stumble, sword wavering, and for a moment, the drums seemed to lose their thunder. He barked orders, rallying his closest warriors. Hold the line, protect the captives. Do not let them see fear. Some warriors hesitated, stealing glances at the top of the pyramid. They had fought for gods older than the mountains, yet now their faith wavered like a candle in wind. The Spaniards seized the moment, pressing forward with renewed ferocity, their swords and pikes cutting gaps where none had existed before. Cortez, sensing the shift, did not hesitate. He pressed his advantage, striking with precision, forcing the high priest backward toward the altar. Each clash of steel and obsidian was punctuated by the cries of the dying below. The pyramid steps were slick with blood, but Cortez did not falter. Esquintly realized that this battle was no longer only about strength or numbers. It was about spirit, whose courage could withstand the madness of war, whose faith could endure when the gods themselves seemed to tremble. And as Cortez's blade pressed closer to the priest, the battlefield below reacted, the Aztec warriors' rhythm faltering, their unity cracking, as if the fate atop the pyramid was being mirrored in every heartbeat on the ground. The clash of worlds teetered on the edge of collapse. One moment, one strike, could decide the destiny of an empire. The high priest staggered, blood streaking his robes, eyes wild with fury and fear. Cortez pressed closer, sword raised, the weight of the battle echoing in every step. The wind whipped around them, carrying the sounds of chaos from below. Screams, drumbeats, the clash of steel and obsidian. With a roar, the priest lunged one final time. His obsidian knife flashed, aiming for Cortez's chest with a speed that was almost supernatural. Cortez barely parried, the edge of the blade scraping along his armor with a ringing screech. Sparks flew, catching the sunlight, blinding them both for a heartbeat. Below, Esquintly saw the movement and realized the priest intended to strike decisively. He threw himself forward, rallying a group of warriors to push back the Spaniards attempting to ascend the final steps. Spears and clubs struck, momentarily halting Cortez's support, giving the priest a brief reprieve. The high priest's eyes met Cortez, burning with defiance. "You may cut me down, invader," he hissed, "but the gods will rise again. The sun will not bow to your steel." Cortez's grip tightened. He ducked under a wild strike, thrusting his sword upward with precision. The blade found its mark, cutting through the priest's defense. The man stumbled, clutching his wound, the weight of his failure pressing down as heavily as the sun above. For a fleeting moment, silence fell atop the pyramid. The drums below slowed, uncertain, as if the very heartbeat of the Aztec army faltered. The captives clutched one another, their eyes wide, sensing that the tide had shifted. And at the edge of the pyramid, Cortez stood, breathing heavily, his sword slick with blood. A man against the gods, yet victorious for this instant, as the battlefield below held its collective breath. Below the pyramid, the Aztec warriors wavered. The high priest's falter was more than a wound. It was a signal. Fear spread like wildfire through the ranks, threading its way between even the most battle-hardened warriors. Spears lowered, shields wavered, and the rhythm of the drums, once relentless and terrifying, stuttered into uncertainty. Esquintly's heart pounded as he tried to rally them. "Stand! Fight for the gods! Fight for your brothers!" He roared, but his voice was drowned by the chaos. The Spaniards, sensing the shift, pressed their advantage, cutting through the line with surgical precision. Cavalry surged, swords slashing, guns cracking thunder in the air. The captives, once terror-stricken, saw hope for the first time. Some scrambled toward the edges of the battlefield, shielded by the few warriors still holding their ground. Others huddled, too afraid to move. Yet their fear was tempered by the distant glimpse of Cortez atop the pyramid, standing victorious over the priest. Itzcuintli himself fought with desperation, felling Spaniards with skill born of years of training, but it was no longer enough. For every man he struck down, two more seemed to take his place. The sacred line was breaking, the order unraveling, and the gods' favor, once so certain, seemed to shift. Smoke, blood, and the cries of the dying filled the valley. And as the sun bore down mercilessly, the Aztec warriors, proud and fearless moments before, began to retreat, their unity shattered, their courage eroded, and the weight of the Spaniards' advance pressing them toward defeat. The pyramids, once towering symbols of divine power, now cast long shadows over a battlefield that had turned. The gods had not intervened, and the world that had belonged to warriors and sacrifices trembled in the hands of men in steel. Cortez stood atop the pyramid, sword in hand, surveying the battlefield below. The Aztec warriors, once a tide of unstoppable force, now scattered in disarray. The captives, their faces streaked with tears and blood, hesitated for a heartbeat before moving toward the Spaniards' ranks, guided by Cortez's remaining men. Itzcuintli refused to let the day end without one final stand. With a roar that shook the air, he rallied a handful of warriors, their bodies battered, their armor torn, their feathers caked with dust and blood. They surged forward in a desperate charge, hoping to reclaim the captives, hoping to strike at the heart of the invaders. Steel clashed with obsidian once more. The few remaining Spaniards held their ground, cutting down the last of the attackers with grim determination. Horses reared and kicked, spears thrust, and the final desperate screams of the warriors echoed across the valley. But the tide had turned irrevocably. Itzcuintli, seeing his warriors fall one by one, realized the futility of his charge. The captives were beyond reach, the priests had been defeated, and the godly fire that had fueled his people's courage was dimming. With a final glance at the pyramid, he signaled a retreat, dragging the few survivors back toward the safety of the forests and causeways. Cortez descended the steps carefully, bloodied and exhausted, yet unyielding. He reached the captives, offering them water, words of comfort, and a sense of safety that had seemed impossible hours before. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the valley, marking the end of the battle. The Aztec Empire had fought with courage and ferocity, but the Spaniards had taken the day, and with it, a foothold that would change the land forever. The sun sank low over the Valley of Mexico, painting the pyramids in blood-orange light. Smoke rose from the battlefield, curling around the stone steps and drifting toward the horizon. The clash of gods and men had ended, leaving only silence, broken by the occasional groan of the wounded or the whisper of the wind through shattered banners. Cortez stood atop the pyramid, surveying the field. The dead lay scattered like broken statues, warriors and horses alike mingled in a grim testament to the ferocity of the battle. Around him, his men tended the captives, some of whom wept, some silent in shock, all survivors of a day that would live in nightmares and stories alike. Itzcuintli, wounded and weary, had led the few who survived into the forests beyond the valley. His people had fought with honor, their courage unmatched, yet the weight of steel and thunderguns had proved too great. He looked back once, toward the pyramids, the temples where the gods had once ruled unchallenged. A shadow passed across his face. Grief, rage, and the unbroken pride of a warrior who had fought until the very end. Cortez descended the steps carefully, his armor dented, his body scorched by sun and battle, but his resolve unshaken. The priests were gone, the captives safe, and the Spaniards held the field. Yet even he felt the weight of the gods' eyes, the enormity of the empire he had stepped into, and the fire that still burned in the hearts of the people he had conquered. The valley was quiet now, but the echoes of that day would remain. The clash of obsidian and steel, the cries of warriors, the fire of sacrifice. All were etched into the land itself. A world that had belonged to gods and warriors now trembled under the shadow of new conquerors, and the story of that terrible, blazing day would live forever in memory, fear, and legend. The sun set, leaving the pyramids to cast long, dark shadows over a valley forever changed.